Western media is applauding the revolution in Syria as a bad guy is overthrown and the rebel leader praises diversity. But before you book your tickets to Damascus Pride 2025, just let me explain how this is going to be a disaster for Britain. They're emptying Syria's prisons of Islamists and there are now tens of thousands of jihadis with no dictator to fight against and with even more of a grudge against the West than your average Islamic fundamentalist, while we still have open borders and security services who admit they're paying less attention to Islamic terrorism. It's going to be carnage. Syria has seen its dictator of 20 odd years, Bashar Al Assad, overthrown. He's fled to Russia, and as a former ophthalmologist, he's a rare example of a Syrian refugee who actually is a doctor. Now our media establishment is celebrating the banishment of a Middle Eastern dictator like they always do. Oh look, it's so liberal now. They have a woman interviewing a woman and they have no headscarves on.
You know, some people are concerned that a lot of the rebels are Islamists. They are from organizations that have extremist ties. Do you worry about it?
For me, after what I have witnessed yesterday and what happened inside Naya prison, this is absolutely fine. Let's have the rebellions. Let's have this Islamic whatever shit over going out. This is more peaceful than what the regime and the Assad regime was doing to our mother, to our daughters, to our people here in Syria.
The leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that's the biggest faction of the Syrian rebels, was a wanted terrorist affiliated with Al-Qaeda who had a $10 million bounty on his head. Now he's cropped his beard and he's got new togs. He's had a glow-up, not a blow-up. He's applauded in the press as a moderate who tells troops not to frighten children and celebrates diversity. And I'm sure it's completely genuine and not just window dressing to make these Islamic extremists eligible for BlackRock funding. Yes, they'll burn Yazidi sex slaves in a cage, but what a diversity and inclusion strategy. Some wag even added pronouns to his strapline on CNN, although I can assure you he hasn't actually announced his pronouns yet, so he could still be non-binary. There's also talk of the millions of Syrian refugees who arrived over the past decade and a half going home to their now free and bountiful country. There are hopes that in the power vacuum created by the sudden departure of Bashar Al Assad, the heavily armed violent medieval tribes who each control different parts of Syria will now suddenly down weapons and embrace each other and form a functioning liberal democracy. Well, I'm sorry to be the pessimist peeing on the flame of hope, but haven't we been here before? Yay, Gaddafi's gone. Springtime for Libya. Yay, Saddam has gone. I'm sure a Western-style democracy will now spring up in Baghdad. Yay, the Shah of Iran has been deposed. Let's all go on holiday to Tehran. Don't forget to pack your bathing suit. Nope, it's going to be complete carnage. There's going to be a wave of refugees coming to Western Europe, many of whom will legitimately be fleeing persecution. I mean, does anybody really believe that the new Islamist leaders will stick to their word of respect and diversity and be nice to Syria's Christian, Alawite and Druze minority groups? Well, look how nice these new Islamic jihadis are already being to Syria's Christian community. Here's one of them making sure that their Christmas tree is securely fastened to the ground. Oh, thanks buddy, that's so kind. Where can I get that Christmas tree stand, by the way? The ones you get in Britain can be knocked over by a gerbil. By the way, isn't it interesting to see how Muslims are treated in Christian countries? We ban references to Christmas and say happy holidays instead. We fund mosques, we celebrate Eid and bend over backwards to accommodate them. Just this week, polite Germans looked the other way while Syrian immigrants marched through a Christmas market. There are already reports of Syria's Christian minority being attacked by Islamist mobs who are rampaging around the country, attacking former members of Assad's regime, attacking Kurds, attacking Alawites, attacking people from a slightly different Islamic sect to themselves. How did it turn into Mad Max so fast? It's been like 3 days. How did that car rust so fast? Maybe this whole thing is a psyop using props from Waterworld. Syria used to be a Christian country, by the way. There's a place called Valley of the Christians that pretty soon won't have any Christians in it. And it's not just Christians being persecuted. Syria's Druze community are even asking to be part of Israel to keep them safe.
نحن يا عمي إذا خيرت هذا الشرعي فعليك باختيار الشرع وإن كان هذا شرع يعني موجود نحن نطلب ضمن للجولين ولكن أقل بكثير من الشرع اللي جاي إعلاني. الشرع الثاني اللي جاي إعلاني الشرع اللي جاي إعلاني ممكن ياخذ نسواننا يا عمي ممكن
So obviously there's going to be a lot of people who are fleeing this persecution, but mixed in with the legitimate refugees could be jihadis. For the last decade, Syria has been a magnet for Islamist fighters from around the world who went to fight against Assad and establish an Islamic state. With the fight for Syria over suddenly, they'll be looking for the next battle, and they're better armed, they're better funded, and they're better trained than the jihadis who attacked Europe a decade ago. And Britain has a weak asylum system that anyone can cheat. There are thousands of hardcore Islamists being released from Syrian prisons with a grudge, and our counter-terror services openly admit they're taking their focus off Islamic terrorism to deal with Russia and China, and of course the mythical far right who seem to consist of a handful of autistic teenage boys who never commit any terror atrocities but still have to have lots of resources focused on them lest MI5 get accused of Islamophobia. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, whose leader is getting such a glowing write-up in the Western press, is already linked to fatal terror attacks in Europe, such as the beheading of the French school teacher Samuel Paty, whose killer was praised by a jihadi in Syria. So get ready for a whole bunch of stabbings and bombings, and prepare to be gaslit once again into singing "Don't Look Back in Anger," and prepare to go to jail if you complain about it. Anyway, looking at Syrian refugees who fled Bashar Al Assad, will they go home now that he's gone? Syria could do with a bunch of engineers and doctors now that its bridges have been blown up and there are lots of people requiring medical attention. Our immigration minister Angela Eagle said that if people wish to return to Syria from the UK, she'd certainly like to facilitate that. In fairness, a bunch are already returning. Here's footage of refugees leaving Turkey to head back into Syria. However, will the refugees who made it all the way to the British Isles want to go back? Some seem unwilling to leave their cushy lives in Western Europe.
What's going on here? What's this all about?
So for the past few decades we've been under constant oppression by Bashar Al Assad, dictator of Syria.
Yeah.
He's been imprisoning civilians, he's been murdering, torturing, massacring everybody left and right.
Alright.
So since this morning, since 2 a.m. we've reclaimed Damascus being the capital of Syria.
Yes, yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So the entire country is free now.
So you're free now?
We are free now.
So
finally.
Finally. So now does that mean all you go back to Syria now?
The economic situation isn't correct.
Okay. So it's economic reasons. You're in Ireland, economic reasons.
The irony is, lots of economic migrants from places like Africa and Asia pretended to be Syrian to get into Britain in the first place. So if we do repatriate Syrian refugees, a bunch of them are going to be people from stable countries like Pakistan or Gambia that came here for economic reasons and will now get sent to a rapidly destabilising war zone with not many jobs apart from public lynching operative and covert Israeli asset. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Under the European Convention on Human Rights, deporting refugees, particularly those with families or from unsafe countries, is basically impossible. The trouble with our immigration system is that it punishes people who need our help and helps people who lie. And there are already predictions of millions of Syrian refugees coming to Europe. You might say, oh, but Leo, Britain says it's paused applications. Look, in reality, the British asylum system is so weak and so corrupted that any Syrian can get in. They just have to rip up their passport and then tell border officials that they're Iraqi or Afghani and they're gay or Christian. There's a whole industry of NGOs, charities and human rights lawyers dedicated to helping people game the asylum system. And European countries are closing their borders, which makes Britain an even more attractive destination in comparison. And don't be fooled by Keir Starmer's tough talk on immigration. He's making it easier for illegal immigrants to stay as asylum seekers and fast-tracking their claims without any plan for removals. Keir's Labour Party even have an incentive for refugees to keep coming. Once migrants are settled, they tend to vote Labour. Traditionally, migrants have tended to settle in big cities which already vote Labour. So Labour have a plan now called Operation Scatter that will disperse migrants into Tory voting areas to tilt the electoral balance in Labour's favour. Mass migration was started by Labour. They openly admitted it was to rub the right's nose in diversity and change the voting demographics of the country. Britain essentially has no border control. Someone even posted on TikTok that they were refused visas in Portugal, Canada, Austria, Estonia, Czechia, Poland, Italy, Greece and America before being accepted in the UK. The worst thing about this is that Britain wasn't even his first choice. He just had to settle for Britain when the former Soviet Union didn't let him in. And there's probably a bunch of Islamic fundamentalists getting ready to come to Britain from Syria. There are apparently over 10,000 Islamists in jail in Syria. I mean, to be fair, that's probably less than the number of Islamists in British jails, but the Syrian rebels are now releasing them. They've been held underground for decades in places like Sednaya prison. That's a vast labyrinthine network of tunnels going down hundreds of feet, and apparently there are families down there whose offspring have never seen the light. It's like a Joseph Fritzl fever dream. I don't know how they had kids. I'm not even sure any women were locked up. It's like Jurassic Park. Through repeated violent bombings, nature just found a way to procreate. Eyewitnesses speak of thousands tortured to death and bodies dissolved in acid or crushed. Omar al-Shoghi, who was detained under the Assad regime as a teenage political prisoner, says in the 3 years he was in the Sednaya prison, he saw over 17,000 people dead. And if there's a lesson to learn from British prisons, is that when you lock up thousands of jihadis, they don't de-radicalise each other in prison. These released jihadis will have extra reasons to bear a grudge against the West as well. Syria was a favourite location for the CIA to rendition Islamic terror suspects for what we can politely describe as a stern dressing down and robust questioning. So the people coming out of these prisons are likely to be quite ideologically rigid and probably want some revenge on the West for the scorch marks on their testicles. And what about when they get here? Back in October, the head of MI5 was warning that ISIS is back. This is Ken McCallum, the director of Britain's domestic security services. He told a press conference, "Today's Islamic State is not the force it was a decade ago, but after a few years of being pinned well back, they've resumed their efforts to export terrorism." And now he's warning that MI5 has had to pare back its counter-terrorism focus because of the growing threat from hostile states such as Russia, China and Iran. Apparently MI5 has finite resources and has to make uncomfortable choices. But this isn't like a normal government department where cutting back in one area might mean people waiting longer for their driving licence or a planning application for a shed. This is going to result in British children getting killed. We've already got over 40,000 Islamists on MI5 terror watch lists, and some of them sometimes get through. There's going to be more chance of that happening if resources are cut for counter-terror services. I mean, Jesus Christ, if the government needs to save money, surely they could get rid of some diversity officers or scrap the department in charge of jailing people for legitimate opinions. And because of our government's ideological insistence that multiculturalism is super, even though Syria itself shows that multiculturalism can result in friction and conflict, and our government's overarching imperative to not appear racist, they'll have to apportion at least half of MI5's resources to the imaginary scourge of the far right. So look forward to them arresting a lot of autistic 14-year-old white boys and spending a lot of money publishing ridiculous studies about how Lord of the Rings is far right, instead of spending that money and those resources actually stopping terror attacks. And there are already lots of Syrians here. Different Syrian factions have been fighting it out in Manchester. I mean, thank God we have open borders and a generous asylum system so people are able to enrich Britain by having these fights in Manchester instead of having them in Damascus. And the push for people to leave Syria is going to get worse, not better. What's left of Syria's economy is going to get eviscerated in the turmoil. And everyone, Israel, Turkey, Russia and America, is now bombing Syria to protect their interests or to destroy the military kit they left behind. To make sure the violent Islamists taking over don't have much capability to attack it, Israel has totally wiped out the Syrian Navy and Air Force and is bombing chemical weapons factories, which sounds like a good idea, but unfortunately it's releasing the chemical weapons, so there's a lot of people sneezing in Damascus right now. And all of this is going to add to the pressure for refugees to come to Europe. Syria used to be a Christian country, just like Lebanon, and they show how a multicultural society can descend into hell with different sects all fighting it out. And Britain used to be a culturally homogenous, high-trust society. It's weird that the progressive cabal who run Britain, and I'm not talking about the politicians, I'm including the civil service, lawyers and media, etc., they've all been actively working to destroy this strong society and replace it with a tribal patchwork like Syria. And just as the issue with terror attacks from imported cultures looks likely to get worse, the government is cutting back resources to deal with the problem. I guess we'll see how it works out, but it doesn't look good. And if the government can't keep British children safe, I'm not sure they'll be able to keep a lid on the British people. Syria might not be the only country having a revolution. Anyway, thanks for listening. Please send this video to a politician to lobby them to be less stupid. And you can buy me a raw milk eggnog in the link below. And if you want to support me making these videos and get exclusive content and be part of a nice community of the only sane people left in the West, you can sign up to my Patreon. There's a link below. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'm Leo Kears. Bye. Bye bye.